So last week, I was in a restaurant in North Carolina, and we were sitting at the bar, and the owner was sitting right there because they were about to close, and my mother starts talking to her, and somehow or other, the owner just looks at me, and she's like, well, what do you do? And, I wasn't about to tell her I'm a YouTuber. So I was like, I'm a writer. I mean, I am, technically. And she's like, well, what do you do? So I told her my name, and she's like, I'm going to Google you. And I was like, okay, but I'm super canceled right now. And she, like, laughed and clearly thought I was kidding. Or maybe didn't know what that meant, or, knew it in some, like, right-wing way. And then she, like, Googled me and, like, started laughing because the first thing in the, the questions people ask is, why is Lindsay Ellis canceled? And I mean, why indeed? But before I get into this, I need to lay some groundwork. Ladies and boomers of the jury, here you go. Canceling is a public shaming of a member of a community for some violation of that community's standards by other members of that community. But the term actually originated with a 1981 song called Your Love Is Canceled by the band Chic. The song was inspired by a bad date guitarist Nile Richards went on at the height of the band's success, wherein his date behaved in a way that he felt was presumptuous and unacceptable, which really turned him off.
Your love is canceled. No, your love is canceled.
So basically it was inspired by this idea, any potential future we might have had, any potential love that might have developed, canceled. The song was not a hit at the time, but it stuck around, and over the decades, the term, as used in the song, started appearing in other pieces of art and music, including in songs by rappers like 50 Cent and Lil Wayne, until eventually gaining popularity in the vernacular of Black Twitter. In this original vernacular use, declaring someone or something canceled was not really an attempt to, instigate a boycott or hold someone to account, but more of a personal decision, not unlike Chic's original song, canceling them in the television of your mind. So to cancel someone wasn't a call to deplatform, it was more just saying, you stepped out of line, so I'm done with you. Like when the city of New York canceled Mayor de Blasio for eating pizza with a fork and knife. Which, to be fair, is the only reason to criticize the man. The connotation of this term with callouts and deplatforming didn't happen until a few years ago, as Me Too began and callouts did lead to some powerful people actually losing things. According to Washington Post writer Clyde McGrady, as callouts led to greater consequences, some people became nervous about how social media had changed power dynamics in the court of public opinion. Cancel culture was the diagnosis, and the term became a catch-all defense for those trying to evade public criticism of any kind. But now, cancel is just another word that white people have taken and run into the ground. So like woke before it, it has gone from AAVE vernacular to right-wing grievance buzzword, which is more or less where we are today.
Pretty quickly, and we are now seeing wokeism and diversity and inclusion. And
this is just the cancel culture, and I will tell you, the people at home should be scared because their ball game is next, their business will be next.
If it continues, it won't just be Republicans who get canceled. It won't just be the President of the United States. The cancel culture will come for us all.
So I have a lot that I want to unpack here because I've had a bit of an ordeal that led to me realizing that I was bad for Twitter and Twitter was bad for me. And so I deleted my account. And for some dumb fucking reason, the fact that I deleted my Twitter account not only made, actual news, my name was trending for several days. Is this another video about canceling? Or worse, the dreaded apology video? Do these people not realize I'm not a real celebrity? I'm the number 21,000th-ish most subscribed channel on YouTube. And I've published all of one book that only reached number 7 on the New York Times list. But it did hit the New York Times list. So we'll get into why in a minute, but I'm neither going to go full Andrew Cuomo, pew pew, I'm being canceled by multiple credible allegations. You're never gonna be president, Andy. Or full crying apology video. Though those do seem to be good for business.
And I just ask that you press pause for a moment and even just for 10 seconds, just cover this in prayer because there is so much healing that needs to take place.
Some of the time. No, sir. I've decided to do the one thing Americans should never do and vote third party. It's been a long time since we've done a list, hasn't it? So here we go. List. Part 1. Twitter is garbage. In the halcyon days of the early 2010s, Justine Sacco was a PR executive who traveled often for work, and not having many Twitter followers herself, often tweeted pitty little nothings, which on the morning of December 20th, 2013, as she was boarding a flight at Heathrow for a work trip, included this tweet: "Going to Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding. I'm white." Okay, so on its face, this is pretty inexcusable. It didn't take long for the tweet to catch the eye of Sam Biddle, then an editor at Gawker Media, who signal boosted it with a comment, "And now a funny holiday joke from IAC's new PR boss." The flight from Heathrow to Cape Town was 11 hours, and in that 11 hours, attention to this tweet spread like wildfire. Incredulity, horror, disgust, and also very quickly, glee, excitement. Sacco had less than 200 followers, and being on a plane with no internet, didn't know that she was Twitter's villain of the day, nor that she was one of the top trends worldwide. So there was a delicious irony to the fact that this woman had been canceled and didn't even know it. People had her flight number, tracked it obsessively, were just thrilled with this idea that she was going to land, and realized she had been found out. The hashtag #HasJustineLandedYet also began to trend. Someone even went to the Cape Town airport when she landed, took a picture of her, and shared it with the rest of the world. A few months later, upon being asked why it appealed to him, Sam Biddle said of the incident, "The fact that she was a PR chief made it delicious. It's satisfying to be able to say, okay, let's make a racist tweet by a senior IAC employee count this time." And it did. I'd do it again. But while people of course gleefully obsessed over the tweet, no one seems interested in why she said it or what she meant by it. No matter how you cut it, it's a bad look. It's a flagrant flaunting of privilege. So it's funny that she got fired and, I'm not gonna, she had it bad for a while. And I don't want to speculate on exactly how ruined her life was, but it would also be reasonable to assume that this is a joke about white privilege, right? That it was bad and insensitive and made light of a terrible affliction that still kills thousands of people every day, but that she didn't mean it literally. And at the time, everyone involved seemed to think that of course she deserved to have her life ruined over it, even if they understood it was a joke about white privilege. Justine Sacco's family in South Africa were African National Congress supporters, the party of Nelson Mandela. They were longtime activists for racial equality. So while I can't read her original intent, perhaps she felt worldly enough and enough in the club and enough of an ally that she could comfortably make such a joke, and that it would be understood. White people do this a lot, and I cannot say I am not guilty of this too. A year later, Sacco said to John Ronson, author of So You've Been Publicly Shamed, "To me it was so insane of a comment for anyone to make. I thought there was no way that anyone could possibly think it was literal. Living in America puts us in a bit of a bubble when it comes to what is going on in the third world. I was making fun of that bubble," while also conceding I had no business commenting on the epidemic in such a politically incorrect manner on such a public platform. Biddle got caught up in his own shitstorm when he tweeted the following in 2014. And you'll never guess who was mad on the internet in 2014. Ultimately, Gamergate is reaffirming what we've known to be true for decades. Nerds should be constantly shamed and degraded into submission. Then adding, "Bring back bullying." I was there, man. Bold of you to provoke them like that. Well, you can guess what happened. There was a massive campaign against him, some from obvious bad faith right-wing trolls, but some who seemed to think that he literally was advocating for a return to the 1950s, where dumping books of dorky middle schoolers was de rigueur. Biddle publicly apologized to Sacco on the anniversary of her, well, it wasn't called canceling yet, a Twitter-wide dogpile, let's call it, writing, "Twitter is a fast machine that almost begs for misunderstanding and misconstrual. Deliberate misreading is its lubricant. The same flatness of affect that can make it such a weird and funny place also makes it a tricky and dangerous one. Jokes are complicated, context is hard, rage is easy. By this point, they had actually become friends, and comparing their experiences, he said, structurally, we had made the same sort of joke. Here is what a truly horrible person, a person whose attitudes were entirely opposite from mine and those of the people who know me, would say. You could argue that hers was worse, conjuring a real and pernicious attitude that had resulted in systemic historical oppression and mass death, but the impulse was the same, and so were the reactions. So even though there's a disconnect between the intended interpretation and the actual interpretation, there's also a disconnect between the severity of the crime and the gleeful savagery of the punishment. And this is not relegated to the early 2010s. It happens now more than ever. Twitter always has a villain of the day. Before me, it was Shrimp Bean Dad. I don't know. Something milkshake duck. God, am I a milkshake duck? I feel like I'm too old to be a milkshake duck. I've been around too long to be a milkshake duck, right? To a certain extent, the villain of the day almost follows a script, especially now that we've all been losing our minds because we've all been inside for a year doing nothing but looking at our phones. Person says dumb thing, it gets some attention, person gets defensive, the defensiveness spurns outrage, people start coming out with receipts, the OP deletes their account. And Twitter is garbage because the user experience, UX as they call it in the industry, is designed to encourage this kind of behavior. It's engagement, fast and emotional and satisfying, and easily forgotten. Communication through Twitter often happens through shorthand, micro-interactions that fit a limited number of predetermined narratives and scripts because you're exposed to thousands of these per day, which is why we have these Twitter script phrases such as, wow, this blew up, friendly reminder, casual reminder, mask off. I don't know who needs to hear this, but thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Should have stayed in the drafts. Read the room. I'm trying to see something. I'll just leave this here. Asking for a friend. Send tweet. The list goes on. And the way it provokes rage and dog piles is baked into the way the very platform itself is designed. Twitter as a company has a really big problem where outside of its user base, its reputation is quite bad, and it hasn't really seen an increase in active users in years. When a site hits its peak in terms of total active accounts, there is still capitalist pressure to increase value and profit. A shrinking pool of eyes plus a need to increase revenue equals a service that needs to squeeze more blood from the same stones. So every UX decision is geared towards increasing time spent with eyes on the screen. That's why they've developed non-chronological timelines, tweets that get added to your feed by virtue of other people liking them, goddamn fucking quote tweets, and so on. Twitter is designed quite literally to be addictive. They aren't getting new users, so they have to keep the ones who are there from logging off. Twitter wants you to post, and it wants you to boost, and it wants you to engage, so it will put as few barriers between the user and engagement action as possible. So with all that in mind, it's no wonder that among the many pre-written shorthand Twitter scripts, Twitter's villain of the day is even a thing, and that it's a common truism on Twitter that the only goal is not to become the villain of the day. The unspoken understanding that it can be anyone if they're not careful.
It'll happen to you. No way, man. We're gonna keep on rocking forever. 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 Forever.
Engagement is often driven by outrage, and so we have this combination of high emotionality with a desire to perform. Social media is designed to manipulate our desire for approval, and a part of that these days is the desire to perform allyship. White people in particular all want to be told they're one of the good ones, which is why people like Justine Sacco gain such attention in the first place. In a fundamentally unjust world, it's satisfying to take a cosseted bigot down a peg. So if we can only get one more wrong-headed, bigoted head on a pike, humiliate one more blackface stewer or one more appropriative food blogger, we could heal this world. And inevitably, it was my turn. Because I cannot shut the fuck up on Twitter. On Friday, March 26th, 2021, I was Twitter's villain of the day. So, for those of you who haven't yet seen my offending tweet, let's have it. My Justine Sacco moment. Are you ready to see why mommy's canceled? Also, watched Raya and the Last Dragon, and I think we need to come up with a name for this genre that is basically Avatar: The Last Airbender reduxes. It's like half of all YA fantasy published in the last few years anyway. That's it. That's the tweet. So I imagine some of you are very confused. Part 2, valid criticism. So from what I can tell, the whole thing originated when some Southeast Asian artists and animators read the tweet as being dismissive and reductive and implying all Asian-inspired things are the same genre. And to me, it was made even more frustrating by the fact that several of the people who started this hadn't even seen the movie. In fact, most people who were getting involved with this conversation hadn't even seen the Dragon movie. Looks like no one saw the Dragon movie. But here's the thing, I kind of had my own has Justine landed yet experience by popping off the tweet, reading a few responses who understood what I was getting at, going to bed, and it blew up while I was asleep. Hashtag has Lindsay woken up yet? And because by the time I woke up, I'd already gotten a few like, oh my god, are you okay? Messages from friends before I even opened Twitter. By the time I looked at my timeline, I saw very little that I would consider valid criticism. So I feel like I need to establish that this whole thing stopped being about valid criticism very, very quickly. And I'll talk about that later in the video. But by the time I woke up, it had already blown way past this is a careless display of white privilege to this sort of thing is a contributing factor to the mass murder of Asian women that just happened. So, this is what we call an overstatement of harm. It had gone from possible insensitive microaggression from a C-list YouTuber to contributing to hate crimes. And that didn't feel like anything I would consider valid. So it's, early in the morning, I just woke up and I responded with frustration because I was being ascribed an intentionality which was not there, which, well, if anyone who spent any time on Twitter can tell you, getting defensive and doubling down is about the last thing anyone should do, so that was an oopsie. And I tried to give, some credence to the valid criticism by saying, like, if you squint, I can kind of see what you're saying, and God damn it. It was early. You shouldn't tweet in the morning. No, you shouldn't tweet at all. You shouldn't tweet. Nobody should tweet. So that very poorly worded frustration was met with even more outrage that I was not taking in to be valid critique of POC when I am too busy being bowled down by mountains of hyperbole. And this word racist over and over and over, which is bound to make anyone a little bit defensive. So when all of these things are coming at you, it's impossible to genuinely consider actually valid critique in a timely fashion, because your defenses are at 100. And when I'm being accused by hundreds of people of contributing to anti-Asian American hate crimes by saying that the Disney thing reminded me of the Nickelodeon thing, it's honestly kind of stunning to me that any reasonable person would expect someone in my position to take in all of these hundreds of tweets, process them reasonably, and within minutes be like, yes, I see your point, reasonable ones, because I am able to parse you out from the people saying I'm responsible for hate crimes. Now, before we go forward, it must be acknowledged that being any person of color in the United States right now is just to be constantly worn down in a million tiny ways every day, all the time, by a society that is low-key shitty. High-key shitty. It's shitty. These critiques don't come from nothing, and there are issues both in the film industry and the culture at large that is making people hyper-vigilant. I'm not going to follow that with a however. I just want to lay that groundwork and acknowledge that. Part 3. White nonsense. I know that's not the most PC way of saying that, but I have many, many white friends, so I'm allowed to say that. So in the case of this tweet, I went to bed, morning on the East Coast, and, there was some discourse by people who, had some valid upset, and the nations all lived together in harmony until the whites attacked. Because a common refrain of these valid criticisms were that I was ignoring POC voices and talking over POC voices. But the vast, vast majority of the avalanche of angry I was getting was from white people. Not all, but definitely, at least in terms of the extremely hyperbolic ones, this is the majority. White people, come here. Come here. We need to have a chat. I think maybe we need to admit that those of us on the progressive side of the fence, as it were, are feeling kind of under pressure these days. We are horrified by the racial injustice of the world, especially in the US. We feel the need to perform action, but aren't really presented with very many opportunities to do so. My friend and PBS co-host Princess Weeks remarked during another stupider Twitter thing that happened a few weeks prior about fan fiction ethics. Actually, it's about ethics in fan fiction. It deeply amuses me when people treat shipping, pro and anti, with so much political importance when they literally apply that to nothing else, and to remove all nuance and context, to share fake quotes and facts, to perpetuate harm in order to own people over the right for two white people to kiss. When you marginalize really queer BIPOC and marginalized people, for what? In other words, often white progressives cite black voices when in service of your, well, in this case, ship. Yeah, it was Hannibal or... Oh my god, this is so stupid. You're interested in black voices when it's in the service of poning another white person or white creator whomst you disagree with, but show little interest for issues or advocacy that actually concern black voices in their community, independent of said ponage. Only to immediately be told you're not a real queer little girl, you privileged little twat, by a white lady about 15 minutes later. To be clear, this discussion was about fanfiction. This was about pretend people kissing. Pretendly. So I saw a lot of mealy-mouthed smug nothing about do better and listen to POC. Always listen to POC. Why aren't you listening to POC? Elevate POC voices. Always. Okay. Whomst. Whomst is the valid person of color, oh allies of the jury, because I did listen to a lot of POC, both in public and in private, and I gotta tell ya, there's a diversity of opinions, almost like people of color aren't a monolith. Marginalized communities are not without diversity or conflict, so treating it as such is totally reductive and ignoring other POC voices by centering the loudest or angriest as the most authoritative. A problem only compounded by the way Twitter is designed, which I have already argued is bad. As I was going back and forth over like the timeline and everything that had happened, I found this private message from fellow YouTuber who I have to disclose is half Vietnamese because this is irrelevant. And he said, "I'm trying not to say anything I'm going to regret here, but I have very little respect for the people dogpiling me and mine in the defense of a typically derivative corporate product from the biggest media company in the West because 2 of its 7 writers and 0 of its directors were Asian." This in private, of course, because, you know, he didn't want to get harassed. Privileged twat. So I find the listen to POC refrain, because it's only trotted out in the service of white people poning other white people, very revealing, because what they mean is listen to the POC we can use to pwn someone else. But the POC we don't agree with? Privileged twat. But note this hilarious exchange between 2 white people arguing over my Raya tweet. When pressed on what exactly it is I need to admit wrongdoing for, this woman says, "Again, you're just another white woman talking over actual POC concerns." I love this exchange because this person, one of the shit billion white people mindlessly regurgitating this listen to POC shorthand, the very same person who called Princess a privileged twat. You're not a real queer little girl. Princess's Law in action. There's this incredibly childish dichotomy with the way a lot of people discuss racism, that there are the racists and the non-racists. The 2 genders, and the way to solve racism is to root out the racists and cast them onto Racist Island, away from me and mine, the non-racists, one of the good ones. They do this because they are insecure about their own internalized racism. They cannot conceive that they have any. That thought is terrifying to them because a racist is the worst thing you can be. So instead of doing any introspection, they remain hyper-vigilant to root out the secret bad people, so everyone else will know they're one of the good ones. Racism is a complex system upheld from all wings of our society, from laws to hiring practices to generational wealth to community redlining to internal biases to individual actions. We live in a white supremacist society. When you live in a pig pen, you're gonna get covered in shit. And all of us have the stink on us. And I don't just mean the whites. All of you. Blocked, blocked, blocked. None of you are free from sin. But especially the whites. And yet, people still have this, like, I'll be the racist dragon attitude about how racism works.
Why are you crying so? I'm crying because all of those horrible villagers chased me into this scary cave. I think it's because I'm so racist. Get your hand off my tail, you'll make it dirty.
Racism isn't a system perpetuated by many, many things, including actions, but a character trait, a disease that people try to hide from the world because they know if they're found out, they'll get banished to Racist Island.
And suddenly, he wasn't racist anymore.
While there are still, of course, racist hate crimes and the like, most general displays of racism don't come out of grand, like, cross-burning style gestures, but out of ignorance, carelessness, or negligence. And for white people, a lot of it is just the reality of benefiting from a system designed to privilege you. So I'm not gonna waste my breath on the I'm not a racist line of defense. I'm a white woman from Tennessee. My family is mostly uneducated white trash. I'm not gonna be like, yeah, I didn't internalize any of that. I'm special. I shot out of the womb unscathed. We all have the stink on us. Yes, even you. The reason I bring this up is because another thing that happened after that tweet was the sharing of the receipts. Thousands of people passing around screen caps of tweets and videos and blog entries and anecdotes from my personal life, proving that this was not just a one-off. Oh no, I have a long history. It was high time I was banished to Racist Island. And it's true, I do have a long history of being on the internet. Longer than pretty much all of you, statistically, probably. And there is a list of sins floating around Twitter, carefully and obsessively curated over a period of 13 years. Amazing. Is it because there's a pandemic? Like, where do you guys get all this free time? So I've been accused of a lot of terrible things and remanded for never owning up to my mistakes. Well, today is your day, receipt keepers. You guys have worked so hard on this, so I am going to give you what you asked for. Finally, all that hard work, meticulously combing through every word I've ever said, is gonna pay off. Well, that's what you wanted, wasn't it? Part 4. My list of sins. You weren't prepared for this to turn into a drama channel, were you? Yeah, maybe you were. I mean, this is just what happens when they break your spirit utterly. So, a big part of my, self-preservation strategy over the years is to explain myself as little as possible, because, if you do that, it's already a losing game, and rarely, if ever, talk about my personal life. Clearly, a big mistake on my part. Well, today, we are turning the page. We are spilling the tea. The whiskey. I mean, I knew I was saving this for a special occasion. I mean, technically, I'm a... Whatever. Got my Decep. I haven't used this one in a while. Oh god. Yeah, I really haven't used this in a while. So, take a shot every time Lindsay Ellis does a problematic. So, a common refrain during that weekend where I was trending was, Party A says, Lindsay did a racism. And Party B's like, well, what did she do? And Party A would show the tweet, and Party B would be like, I don't get it. This doesn't seem like a big deal. And then Party A would be like, no, she has a long history of problematic. And Party B is like, I get it now. And then they skip off together into the sunset. Twitter user Dragon Lady Celeste Sparkle has conveniently collated my long, storied history of all my other sins that explain why the Raya thing was just a mask-off moment, and I deserve this, actually. A very good and normal thing to do with your finite minutes on this earth. Take down that YouTuber. Take her down. Literally, all day, people have been replying to my tweet with more and more examples of truly harmful rhetoric that LE has been pushing for a while, and all I can say is how the fuck has she not been called out on a mass scale before? Well, Dragon Sparkle Celeste, she has. She's just never deleted her Twitter account before. Actually, no, that's not true. Last time I deleted my Twitter account, I didn't trend because I guess I wasn't, number 21,000 on the subscribed YouTube channel by that point. But the last time I deleted my account, it was because of the, white genocide crowd. So I guess that's something you have in common. I don't get why I'm like so hated by both sides of the political fence. I don't think I'm like interesting enough to like gather this much attention or emotion. I drive a Honda Civic, like Jesus. So thank you for compiling it in one convenient thread. Makes my job easier. Now the problem with this not at all creepy and obsessive list of every single one of my perceived transgressions over a period of 13 years is that it does not include the times when I have addressed them. But, I'm sure they just, forgot to screen cap those tweets / blog posts / streams / videos, etc., because this list is in such good faith. Nor does it incorporate any of my entire body of work, which, I don't know, doesn't count apparently because, the list of sins is the real me. And the other stuff I do is, for profit or something. So there's like a jillion of these grievances, and, this video is already like 12 eternities long. So believe it or not, what I am about to address is non-comprehensive, because there are a lot of people who were really, really dedicated to, mask off. And credit to where it's due, this was spearheaded by the, leftist Twitter. But again, a lot of these receipts originated with the right wing. I don't even want to call them alt-right, because they're not that principled. More like, Gamergate refugees, the 4chan for the lulz crowd, diet Nazis, let's call them. So some of this is, as many of you have noted, extremely bad faith interpretations of statements which only make sense if you are working backwards from a foregone conclusion. That said, I don't want this to be taken as me saying that I have never done anything wrong. Unambiguously, I have. We all make mistakes. So where I feel like an amendment or an apology is warranted, I will do so. But where I feel like the criticism is being made in bad faith, is unreasonable, or is flat out untrue, I shan't bend the knee, because we here at Lindsay Ellis Industries are not in the business of serving bullshit. So I got my bell of shame here, and as the Black Eyed Peas would say, let's get it started. Harriet Tubman fanfic. This one is like really popular. So the narrative here is that because of this tweet, I ship Harriet Tubman with her enslaver, and I want there to be fanfic of it. I'm just saying, you have to be giving this a very weird read in order to think that's what I meant, but I'm also going to go out on a limb and assume that most of the people mad about this have not seen the Harriet Tubman movie, or if they have, are not familiar with her real history. So the central conflict of the film revolves around Harriet's relationship to her enslaver, a twinky blonde guy named Gideon, played by Taylor Swift's then boyfriend. They are around the same age, they basically grow up together, and early in the film he's framed somewhat sympathetically until he propositions her, demands her submission and fealty, which of course she refuses, and then when she escapes he becomes obsessed with recapturing her, and he is the central antagonist of the entire film. But here's the thing about Gideon. He never existed. He was completely made up for the film. Harriet Tubman's IRL enslaver at the time of her escape was a woman, but instead of having the film center more around Harriet's journey after she got away from the Broaddus family, it instead creates this character in the form of Taylor Swift's boyfriend as the antagonist, a man who, and I cannot express this enough, did not exist in real life. So basically, the film creates an OC that is like super obsessed with recapturing her in a movie where Harriet Tubman also has superpowers. It just felt a little fanficky to me. And so one day I was on an airplane and the person next to me was watching it, and I just kind of started wondering why the filmmakers decided to go that route with the film creatively, because again, it just kind of felt weird to me. Like, and the final showdown in the film is between Harriet and Gideon in a forest that to me was somewhat evocative of the last showdown in The Force Awakens. And this was also kind of like at the height of this sort of thing, this tendency to fanficify historical figures that was partially enabled by Hamilton. So I just kind of idly have this thought like, oh man, I wonder if this movie spurned fic of these two characters. Oh god, actually, I'm not going to check because I don't want to know. Usually I don't really check my mentions, so I didn't see any anger when I tweeted that. Only a few days later when screen caps started circling, and then I got some white women in my DMs demanding that I do better and apologize, specifically not to them, but to all of my black fans that I hurt. So like an hour after I tweeted it, I was like, I better take this down because this is the sort of thing that someone could take out of context in bad faith. Well, so the reason I never addressed this is because, like, the read of that tweet in itself of me being thirsty for Harriet Gideon fanfic was just so absurd, I didn't know what to say. Now, to be clear, no, I should not have tweeted that at all. I was thinking in terms of the creative decision to create Gideon being kind of tone deaf, but the pithy way that I tweeted it still ostensibly glosses over the reality of white owners sexually abusing their slaves being the historical norm, and that is in itself disrespectful. So while I definitely did not mean what people seem to think I meant, I definitely should not have said that. I was, as the kids say, showing my ass. Next, 2009 autistic temper tantrum. Oof. Boy, had to go way back for this one. People wonder why I privated all of my old videos. So I was in film school at the time, and my class was 80% male, and, some of them had a fratty sense of humor. And while I was talking about this movie, Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, one of them made this remark about how the Beast, and I just kind of mindlessly regurgitated it. Beast shape, I'm gonna throw an autistic temper tantrum! Because I was with an edgy boy website at the time, and I wanted to demonstrate that I wasn't like the other girls. I was a cool, edgy boy. It was insensitive and careless. I definitely should not have said that. Next. 2013, The Prince of Egypt, anti-Semitism. God, I can't believe somebody kept this for so long. I'm sorry, this took so much dedication. So, the qualm here is that I did an anti-Semitism because I don't like the way the Prince of Egypt, functionally excuses the mass slaughter of innocent children in the narrative, because the book of Exodus frames it as a necessary evil. And yeah, I don't really care for the Prince of Egypt, and I just don't think the book of Exodus works as a kid's movie. Because it's a kid's movie, it has to frame the protagonists as understandable and relatable to modern family audiences, and frame what happens in the book of Exodus as, all fine and good in the framework of the movie, even when the good guys do some light, mass slaughter. That 10th plague, man, it's a doozy. I remember when we got to Exodus in Sunday school, and, when it got to the part of the wailing and lamentations of the Egyptian women, when they woke up and there's no dead children, like, even at the age of 5, I was like, yeah, this is pretty fucked up. So my thought process here is that we take for granted the morality of narratives of biblical texts because we grew up with them and they just kind of have so much informed our cultural framework, when if a story like this existed independent of the Bible, it would probably be considered pretty messed up. Especially considering how the movie frames it as all Pharaoh's fault because he's such a stubborn jerk.
Ramesses, you bring this upon yourself.
Like, at least in the Bible, God keeps hardening his heart. And the other thing is, like, in the way that the film progresses, it's really funny to me when, mass slaughter of children happens. Pharaoh Ralph Fiennes is weeping over the corpse of his only son. And then Val Kilmer morosely pieces out, and then, bam, miracles. I mean, I guess in a manner of speaking, the 10th plague is a miracle. And this is not to say you can't make a modern movie about the Bible. I actually really liked Noah. It's easily my favorite Darren Aronofsky movie because it leans in hard on how fucked up and traumatic it would be to have to sit back and, watch and listen while every other human on Earth dies, because God said so.
They are just people. There is room. There is no room for them.
But this is also an example of me using Twitter to feel out other people's opinions before I do video content. A thing I will never do again. A lot of people were like, yeah, but this movie means a lot to me, and a lot of that is because of my religion or my culture. And that was when I decided I was not ever going to touch this movie as a topic for a video. And in the context of this thread, I shouldn't have used the word genocide, considering it's a film about Jewish characters. And for that, I do apologize. I don't think I'd be making the world a better place by talking about why I don't think The Prince of Egypt works, because I don't feel that strongly about it. It's not a big deal. I'm not really here for thing you like is bad actually content for its own sake. Although I love how every tweet in this thread has trigger warnings. Trigger warning, she didn't like The Prince of Egypt. Next. 2013, Charlie's Angels Niqab. This is another one I've addressed a few times, most recently on a live stream a few years ago where we rewatched it and had a high old time laughing about what a comical example of early 2010s white feminism this was. You know what, guys? I'm sorry. I'm calling it. Feminism is over. I'm sorry. We tried. We did our best.
But it's our feminism too!
Our best shot.
You just can't end it for everyone!
I'm not sick of the go make me a sandwich jokes.
Have that lever!
Yeah, so, not gonna lie, this one's pretty bad. This whole thing came about when I was on Twitter one day talking about doing a video on Charlie's Angels and trying to think of how visually to dress myself that was the opposite of Charlie's Angels, and someone on Twitter was like, hey, you should do it in a burqa with pigtails poking out, and I thought that idea was funny. It's too confusing. We don't know what we want. It is apparently way too much to ask that women either have a certain body type or dress a certain way without being judged for it, so 2 options. Burqa or slut.
That's not a burqa, and that's a false dichotomy!
And even at the time, several of my Muslim followers were like, please do not do this. This is a bad idea. And okay, so this is not excusing it, but here is some context. So at the time, my next door neighbor was an Egyptian expat named Hajar, and she was/is a full niqabi, meaning whenever she goes outside, she dresses in the full, well, basically what I was wearing, minus the pigtails sticking out. And basically Hajar was the only next door neighbor I've ever been friends with. And it's another one of those weird problems of considering culture as a monolith. One would assume, or at least I assumed, that she would have zero interest in talking to me and we would have nothing in common considering she's super, super religious. And yes, some women do it voluntarily, but that's its own thing. I'm not gonna get into it. But basically one day we started talking when I was watching The Hunchback of Notre Dame too loud. Really? And she was she caught me on the landing so Hunchback of Notre Dame, huh? So anyway, I mentioned this thing to her and she was like, yeah, whatever, that's hilarious, lol. And so this is not excusing it, but I kind of took that as, well, my friend I know personally said it's fine, so I'm going to, take that opinion over these strangers. But again, even at the time, I had people on Twitter saying, do not do this thing, and I ignored them. And either way, I wasn't making content for Egyptian expats, which I'm pretty sure she's never even seen one of my videos. And either way, it was also completely unnecessary to the point of the video. I could have made the exact same point with a potato sack with pigtails sticking out, and it probably would have been funnier. This one was bad and wrong for a lot of reasons, and I do regret that. Next. 2018, Stephenie Meyer apologia. So the Dear Stephenie Meyer video was about me reflecting on how carelessly I had participated in the casual misogyny surrounding the early Twilight backlash around the time that the first movie came out, late 2000s. And so the general objection here is that the video is racist because I neither mention nor condemn Stephenie Meyer's depiction of the Quileute people. So I'm not gonna lie and say I didn't consider addressing it, and I did have some conversations on Twitter with Indigenous people that were actually productive. See, Twitter's not always bad, just, mostly. But there were 2 main reasons I decided not to discuss it in that video, besides the fact that that was back when I was trying to keep videos around the 20-minute mark. One was the fact that during the backlash of the late 2010s, Twilight's appropriation of the Quileute was not a common criticism and certainly was not weaponized against Stephenie Meyer. It is now, but that just was not a substantial proportion of the backlash at that time. The second one is, once again, we come to this question of the voices of a group being considered a monolith. I definitely talked to some Indigenous people that condemned it, but I also saw some that were like, yeah, actually, no, it's not the best, but I liked it. It was something new. It was like a representation we hadn't seen before. It was refreshing to have Jacob as this character who isn't like a noble savage stereotype and isn't like magically in tune with nature and doesn't have like a sad, broken family. He's just like a nice, normal kid who lives on the res and vibes, at least in the first book. Again, this video was addressing a point in time before Breaking Dawn came out. So I just wasn't really comfortable making a value judgment on which of those was the correct opinion, especially because it didn't really feel relevant to the central thesis. And it's also a complicated issue that just didn't feel at home in that video. Like, for instance, on the one hand, the way the Quileute are depicted in Twilight puts the onus on the real Quileute to educate people that they're not werewolves.
And then the elders, they said, hey, Miss Anne, you got to get out there and educate people that we're really not werewolves.
But on the other hand, the attention Twilight has brought to the tribe has helped them tremendously, not just through tourism, but actually helped them get land back from the feds.
It's opened the way for our tribe economically, and then the media, it helped us a lot. Our ancestors and our past council members have been fighting for over 50 years for our northern boundary dispute. To actually have that day and have President Obama sign, a document saying that, this land is yours. It was like, wow.
But on the other hand, Stephenie Meyer is a multi-millionaire many times over. It is kind of weird that she has given none of that wealth, as far as I know, back to a people whose culture she appropriated, for supernatural love triangles. And while we're on this topic, Amanda the Jedi has been doing a Twilight retrospective, and she brought to my attention a fundraiser that the Quileute have been running for a few years to help move some of their village to higher ground to, protect them from all the tsunamis and, the climate change and whatnot, so that is linked below. If I did the video again, especially now that my videos are like 8 hours long, I'd probably add a little bit mentioning that this conversation became prominent later, but this criticism does kind of always give me weird vibes because it usually comes with this subtext of, and this is why Stephenie Meyer did and still does deserve the harassment she got. One, that is not why people were hassling her in 2008, so I could not fold that into the valid common criticisms folder, and two, no one deserves that. Next. 2018, Transphobia via Tarzan. I genuinely, honestly, really do regret this one, and I have said so a few times. Why do they never screen cap the retractions? Weird. When it was announced that LeFou would become the first out gay character in a Disney movie, the L's, the G's, the B's, the T's, and of course all you filthy Q's. I think it was like 15 minutes after this video went live that I was like, oh god, why did I do that? Less because I was thinking about the optics so much as it wasn't a good joke. Like, I should have used Mulan, goddamn my eyes. I thought this idea of AFAB Turk being angry about wearing a dress was funny, but in hindsight, I really should have considered that it wasn't just any Disney character, it was a gorilla, an animal that trans women are sometimes compared to, and it was extremely careless. And it's a shame because I otherwise really do like that video. Next. 2020. Trans men don't experience oppression, actually. I didn't say that. I said that anecdotally, I had heard from a few trans men over my 80-odd years of existence that they felt that they didn't experience the same level of scrutiny or harassment that they had before they transitioned, because of misogyny. That said, this was also before Elliot Page came out, and I've seen so many people be beastly to him, so, that is a strong counterexample. And I could say that I can't speak for all trans men's experiences, but I didn't claim to, and I'm not sure how you could read that into my statement. I was just repeating anecdotes I had heard. So some of the hate mail I've been getting is calling me a TERF because of this, which I think is really funny. It's like, called a TERF for saying trans men are men. Alright. Next. 2017, Zack Snyder hates his mother. Once again, tweet clipped out of context, and another one the Gamergate refugees were really obsessed with. Not that you guys have anything in common, but... So these tweets are all long deleted, but this was a conversation between me and another film critic, I forget who, talking about how difficult it is to meaningfully discuss Zack Snyder's films, especially at the time, because his fans are a little touchy. And one Snyder fan said, "You know, I don't mind when critics talk about his movies, I just don't like it when they say stuff like Zack Snyder hates his mother." And this was just absurd to me because I have never ever heard a real critic say that. So I responded with what I considered obvious sarcasm, "Well, I actually have it on good authority that Zack Snyder hates his mother." So this was really bad timing because I made this joke literally the night before the news broke that Autumn Snyder had killed herself, the very night before. And so I wake up to just this flood of outrage in my mentions, and like, I am so deeply confused before I even realize what's going on. And it was just like, oh my god. So I don't like Zack Snyder's movies for a lot of reasons, but he does seem like the rare, decent, powerful man in Hollywood, and I can't imagine how awful it was to go through what he did, especially during such a huge production, and I'm impressed and appreciate that the Snyders have been doing such broad advocacy for suicide prevention now. But like, harassing me in the name of like suicide prevention advocacy is like, come on. Now, this is by no means Zack Snyder's fault, and I do not mean to imply that it is. Again, from all I've heard through my Hollywood grapevine, he seems like a decent person, and he can't control what his fans do. And even though I wish he had done it sooner, he has finally disavowed the really bad ones. And I also can kind of appreciate that he probably didn't really have the emotional bandwidth to pay attention to that sort of thing for a long time, let alone, you know, address it. But I'm also sure that the many, many Snyder fans who have told me to kill myself in the last 4 years because of this tweet just didn't know about my own history. Either way, I'm sure it's an issue they all care deeply, deeply about. All over a few Martha jokes. Jesus. Next. 2020, did a misgender. This was a misunderstanding. John Mulaney did an SNL monologue that I didn't love. I said something about it. Curio responded to that. I said, "Yeah, I know, thanks, John," addressing John. We talked it out over Twitter. I apologized. Those tweets are still up. Next. 2012, defending the yellow-facing Cloud Atlas. I'm surprised there are no screen caps for this, probably because the Diet Nazis didn't find that worthy of preservation. But this is true. There was a lot of criticism of Cloud Atlas at the time, and I said something to the effect of, I didn't think it mattered as much as, like, you know, the conversations around blackface because they had a different history. And I don't know why I said that. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. Like, for one thing, I was definitely revealing my ignorance because, like, yellowface is just, you know, a topic I had never really studied. I'd done plenty on blackface, nothing on yellowface. Imagine falling on your sword for Cloud Atlas of all things. My podcast partner's gonna be so disappointed. I'm sorry, Kaveh. So yeah, I still like Cloud Atlas, but the creative decision to use yellowface in the way that they did is pretty inexcusable, and honestly, it does kind of make me uncomfortable to watch now. My bad. Next. 2015, bisexual erasure. So again, another post clipped out of context, and it is quite literally the only time I have ever written about my sexuality, and stuff like this is the reason why I was like, wow, never talking about that again. It is from my now deleted blog, but I linked the archive page below. And in effect, it was basically me kind of working out my feelings on feeling like bisexual erasure was almost a form of privilege. And I still kind of think that's true. And the thing about sexuality is it's just like such a personal thing, and that's why this like conflation of like the political and the personal, while necessary, often makes me really uncomfortable because it was like such a painful process for me and one I never really figured out how to reconcile, so I just never did. So I've never really had a coming out or embracing my truth, more just like slow, quiet, begrudging acceptance. Like I just have these laundry lists of experiences, like from being in college and going to gay clubs and having lesbians suddenly turn cold when they find out you're bisexual, to the popular axiom at the time of bi now, gay later, or highway to homo, or gay until May, to Dan Savage way up into the 2010s saying that bisexual men don't exist, or it's all a phase, or all the way to former respected person Glenn Greenwald saying that the bisexuals are transing the lesbians out of existence as recently as last month. So I can't help but feel a sort of imposter syndrome every time I do anything even tangentially pride related. I feel tolerated, but not accepted. And why do I want to go to that parade? Like, oh, you're here, fine. I guess we're contractually obligated to let you in. So I think for a lot of bisexuals, especially women, we do kind of live in this liminal space of both privilege and erasure. It is painful to feel ostracized from the community when accepting your identity has caused you so much pain in the first place, but at the same time, you can opt out. You can, in effect, pass as straight. Like, if I had $1 for every time someone called me a straight white woman in the last few weeks, that would take care of my Patreon for at least a month. And to answer very good faith actors like Glenn Greenwald. What was his mother thinking? So to answer very good faith actors like blurp 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 as to why proportionally bisexual people tend to end up in heterosexual relationships 75-25 rather than the 50-50 it logically should be, I wonder why that could be. You know, just besides the fact that as a proportion of humanity, there are more straight people to choose from. Well, here I am making a thing out of it. Am I in the club now? Next. 2014, did a bisexual gatekeeping against Mara Wilson. Ah, so we have reached the speculations on my private life portion of the game show. Is now a good time to bring up the fact that Lindsay Ellis was super shitty and biphobic to Mara Wilson when she came out as bi, or are we giving people of color a moment to drag her for filth before we bring up other shit? Be honest. I guess we're doing this. You may know Mara Wilson from her work as a child star in films like Matilda and Mrs. Doubtfire. In the last decade or so, she's worked as a nonfiction author, a voice actor, a Twitter person who makes approximately 680 retweets per day, and also occasionally writer of op-eds for outlets like the New York Times. In 2016, when she gave an interview about coming out as bisexual, it included this quote. "I remember being with bisexual friends. I said, I think I might be bisexual. And a friend of mine who's not a friend anymore said, no, you're not. She was a gatekeeper." Okay, that gatekeep, that's good. I'm gonna use that. So I'm not sure how this random Twitter user decided that she was talking about me as the gatekeeper in this interview from 2016, but someone decided she must have been talking about me based on no evidence whatsoever, and the accusation stuck, mostly because Mara liked that tweet and then about 50 other tweets of people having a high old time with me as Twitter's villain of the day, and I really don't know where this random user's supposition came from, because I have been very, very careful never to say anything about her publicly, either by reference or implication, despite the many times she has talked about this awful former friend she used to have, either, in interviews, podcasts, in, subtweets, in print. It was me.
It's me! I was the turkey all along! I was wondering what that turkey was doing there.
And to my knowledge, she's never indicated that I was the gatekeeper until the liking of this tweet, thereby validating these suppositions. Cool. Cool. Okay, y'all, I'm about to blow some minds, but first I need to provide some context. Mara and I were, at a point in history, friends and literal neighbors. We were both in our mid-20s, we lived like 2 blocks from each other, we were both recent NYU grads, and we were both aspiring writers. And many people who've been following us for a long, long time have observed, you two used to be really good friends, and then suddenly you were not. And that is true. But here's the thing, the anecdote about the gatekeeping bisexual former friend is also true. I do remember the conversation she is talking about, and while the wording she uses isn't how I remember it, the basic gist of the conversation is true. She told me she thought she might be bisexual, and I kind of casually dismissed it on the grounds of her dating style reminding me of a former roommate who prided herself on being straight. It was a fairly short conversation. It happened one time, 7 years ago? Yeah, and we never spoke of it again. So this conversation happened at least a year before we stopped speaking, which was over 5 years ago. And the reason why was a series of compounding factors. This was not one of them. At least to my knowledge. And the truth is, I don't know why I said what I said or reacted the way I did. If that had happened now, I would not have reacted in that way, but even then, I don't know why I was so dismissive offhand about something that I know from my own experience can cause a lot of pain and isolation. And it only came up the one time, was immediately dropped, and we never spoke of it again, and for that reason, I never thought much of it. I didn't consider that she wasn't just kind of saying something off the cuff, but was actually admitting something that she had been considering for a while to someone that she thought would understand, and that person dismissed her. And I didn't even begin to know that this caused any hurt until almost 2 years after that conversation even happened, because she didn't come out until a few months after. between the two of us, and I cannot express this enough, had nothing to do with this. Like, this is something I feel like I need to press on these so-and-so is a secret bigot crusaders. Does it occur to you that you can dislike someone without some irreconcilable ideological differences? This is a personal falling out between two people that has nothing to do with the content we produce. I produce. And I just want to dispel this narrative that, like, someone has to be, like, the secret bigot or, you know, mask off, or there's always the wronged one and the abuser in one of these falling outs, when it's just like, sometimes people just don't get along, kids. I would love to know why Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice fell out, but it is, at the end of the day, none of my business, and they have made it known, and they have kept the why under wraps for almost 40 years, and honestly, good for them. Life goals. And though do trust that this bridge is well and truly forever burned, I do sincerely regret that I reacted the way I did. I think I was probably projecting my own experience with rejection and paying it forward, and I am sorry for that. And no, I shan't be airing any more dirty laundry on this topic, fascinating though it may be. Next. 2009, the rape rap. Someone made a rape joke. Oh my god! Someone call the rape joke brigade. Officer, I have an infraction I need to report to the Ministry of Rape Jokes. Look, honestly, I'm shocked that Lindsay Ellis has not been canceled forever by the rape rap. The Zoomers that are canceling her haven't even discovered the old rape rap she made yet, lol. Very thoughtful that she finally released a Mandarin and Japanese version of the original rape rap. Well, this has been a long time coming, hasn't it? There is this semi-infamous video I did back in 2009, which is called Rape Rap, which is exactly what it sounds like. The joke is that my friend Brian, playing a rapping sexual predator, says horrible things to me online because woman, and I try to get him not to say these things. And honestly, I kind of want to give a slow clap to the Diet Nazis because this is a fetch they have been trying to make happen for years. And I'm honestly kind of happy for them, you know? Like, they have used this to hurt me and humiliate me. And they sent it to, like, PBS affiliate, PBS corporate trying to get me fired. And they've uploaded, like, 800 mirrors to YouTube. They've sent it to my colleagues. They've spammed me with it for over a decade. And it just never spread beyond the Diet Nazi sphere. And it's finally into the mainstream woke skull Twitter. You know, I'm happy for them. They worked so hard for this. So I know the people adding this to my list of sins are very, very concerned about rape victims, and that's why you're upset by this. So I know you would want to know the context for this. You aren't just thoughtlessly adding this to my ledger to help assuage people's moments of doubt that the harassment against me was, in fact, justified. You care about context. And here's your content warning, so if you don't want to hear this, skip to this time code. We're bringing out the tequila for this one. This isn't even fake tequila. So, when I was a sophomore in college, my very first sexual experience with another human being was... Big reason why I was vulnerable to this person was... So he took me back to his studio apartment, and when I woke up and realized what had happened, I started freaking out. And like, I remember like there being this smell, and like, so basically he just like pushed me out of his apartment, and he gave me a $20 bill and just like slammed the door in my face. And I mean, what are you gonna do? So I just, like, the $20 bill was enough money exactly to like, for the cab ride home. And then I got a Nesquik, you know, like the chocolate milk, and a bagel. And then I go upstairs to my dorm room and I like just hork it all up. And then I like just take off my clothes and I just like burn the evidence on our gas stove. Like I just like, you know, it was the clothes' fault. I just, my roommate was out of town at the time, so there was nobody. So I just like burned the clothes and burned the evidence. And I didn't tell anyone that this happened. So nobody knew. So about 1 year later, I was at a Dresden Dolls concert, of all things. And, you know, I think this was 2005. And I was there with my roommate, and we lived in the West Village, and the concert was at Webster Hall. And Webster Hall was about a 15-20 minute walk from our apartment in the West Village. And we got separated on the way home, you know, because, you know, concert and partying. But, you know, and normally that's like no big deal because like it's no big deal to get separated from your college roommate for, you know, 10 minutes. But when I get back to our apartment, I find her on the stairwell, covered in because by our neighbor. So like our literally across the hallway neighbor. So I just like see white. I just like fly into this animal rage, and I don't think it was like, it couldn't have been more than like 5 or 10 minutes before the police showed up, and I was like still in full Hulk mode, and fortunately the ambulance showed up before they could take us to jail, as they do. So we went to the hospital and she got a rape kit done, and so now I'm involved with that case. Cool. Cool. All this while, like this whole time, I had not told anybody what had happened to me. Like, I wouldn't actually tell anybody what happened to me for like another I think it was like another year or two. I think, yeah, it was probably like, yeah, it was like 2 years later. And of course I didn't do it in a healthy way. I think it was probably, yeah, it was something like this, you know, like, is this healthy? So here's the thing, when like something like this happens, you know, and like, you know, there's police involved and police reports and hospitalizations, you know, besides the DA pressuring you out of pressing charges, which is what they did to my roommate. And, you know, I didn't realize that was because, you know, they want to deflate the crime stats in their districts until about 15 years later when Reply All did an episode on that. But the thing is, like, there's a lot of paperwork and like, no, this is relevant. So basically, like, she and I shared this like hanging file, like for all of our paperwork that we had for like various things that were just like, you know, financial aid, you know, essays, college stuff, rape. For the first like few days, it was just this like untouchable, horrible thing that like happened and had to be endured, and was just like this pall over both of us. And, you know, and this was before the DA pressured her out of pressing charges. And so we had this folder, and so like we just somehow, like, I asked her like, well, what's in that folder? And she's like, rape. And we kind of like embellished the folder like with the musical, so it was just like rape and like, you know, horror font, the musical. And I'm not gonna lie and say this like began the process of healing. Categorically it didn't, but, you know, it did make the reality of the situation like accessible. You know, joking about it brings it down to earth. It's no longer this like unspeakable horror. And like, you know, if Cora's life is based on mine in any way, it is this. NYU's TAs were having a strike that semester, meaning that the undergrads were allowed to drop classes basically up until finals without penalty or a failing grade. And what happened was that, like, that was the only semester where that was an option. And if it weren't for that technicality where I could drop classes up till finals, I would have failed out of school. I mean, the failing out part is taken from my experience, not the rape part. I didn't give Cora that tragic backstory. So being just like this 1-2 punch of horrible things, like I was honestly terrible. Like in so many ways, I went catatonic. I wasn't supportive. And I just don't remember like just big chunks of 2005 and 2006. And that sucks because like I really, you know, treasure a lot of my time and education at NYU. There are just like huge blocks of it that I don't remember. But I do remember this. Not long after I graduated, a couple years later, Rape the Musical came up in like a different context. And my friends Brian and Pat, both to this day are, you know, still two of my dearest friends. Brian even officiated my wedding. So Brian had this jacket, which he joked made him look like a flasher. And like somehow or other, he was like freestyling these raps to me and Pat, and I, at the time, found them just like hilarious and cathartic, and I was like, you know, keep going. And so we like started workshopping it, and we're like, oh, let's make a sketch out of this. And I just remember these like lame freestyles while Pat just sat there with this like dead serious expression, not paying attention, and just me like dying laughing and like finding it honestly really helpful. And I don't think, like, at the time, I don't even think they knew. I think they were just like humoring me. So this was a way of tying in all of this like horrible nonsense that happened to me and my roommate in college with some of the misogynist garbage I was getting as a baby woman on the internet in 2009. So it was, as the kids say, a cope. Now, with regard to this jokey joke little sketch that makes such light of rape, I know what you're thinking. This must be so hard for you. That's so sad for you. That must have been super fucking hard for you. But if this was indeed a copey cope jokey joke between friends, should it not have remained private? Yes, you observant good faith person you, it should have. But this was uploaded without my knowledge or permission. Without my consent, you might say. I even blogged about it because at the time I was, of course, getting calls for apologies, and I was like, absolutely not. This happened without my permission, and there's an archived link to that blog entry in the description if you vultures want proof. So the way that this happened at all was, at the time, Channel Awesome controlled all of our individual channels, and we didn't upload them ourselves. We uploaded them to an FTP and scheduled them, and then someone else uploaded it for us. So when I finished this video, I did still think it was funny, but I also realized that this should never see the light of day. This can be just like a practice run for other sketchy things that we do and should stay a private joke between friends. All the while forgetting that my export folder automatically uploaded directly to this FTP. So months pass, I forgot it was even there, and then one day the guy who ran the schedule, I guess, got annoyed that I kept blowing my deadlines, and he was like, fine, I'll just upload whatever's in that FTP folder. But like I started getting these phone calls asking why I scheduled that, and I'm like, I didn't. Take it down. But it was too late, and now here we are. So the Diet Nazis loved this video because, you know, they think I'm like this high-minded liberal who is like so holier than thou, and therefore that this exposes my hypocrisy, and so we can use this to just like torment me and humiliate me and just like constantly like upload it, and like I'll just see it like in my mentions, and sometimes they'll send it to like my colleagues or my publisher just to like try to get them to get a reaction. And so now Woke Skull Twitter has discovered it and just mindlessly adds it to my ledger of sins. And so now here we are, and I'm having to relive one of the worst times of my life just to get you people to back the fuck off.
She tried to pretend this in the rape rap.
Lindsay
Ellis doesn't want you to remember this.
Plays
the rape rap one more time for the home.
Almost as tragic as her rape rap.
Imagine getting canceled over this and not the rape
Lindsay
rap.
did make rape rap, so she's fine with edgy jokes.
I always thought that Lindsay Ellis would get canceled when her rape rap would resurface.
Hang up to these woke people for years. Did you think they wouldn't eventually come for you? Just wait till the discovery of the
May
rape rap.
I remind everyone of the rape rap? That track was fire.
So like all of you, just these people who've been trying to get to me with it and think that like me staying silent is an admission of guilt rather than it being none of your fucking business, even considering that this was not supposed to be made public, and now these woke skulls are just adding it to like my ledger and trying to use it to discredit me. All of you are just loathsome people, and I hope you all And as I mentioned earlier, this list is non-comprehensive. And to everyone out there who is like, well, yeah, but why are you making this all about you? I didn't make this about me. You did. Part 5, the tweet. So if this tweet were a video essay that had been researched for months instead of a tweet popped off in a minute, which I never will make, I will never talk about either of these properties again, it would probably be structured something like this. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a game changer in a lot of ways. Here's some of the things that influenced it: shonen anime, Asian folklore, There's a new generation of American writers, many of them people of color, who were influenced by it. Anime and young adult literature have changed a lot because of this direct and indirect influence, and honestly, I think that's cool. I think that shows and books are honestly much more interesting for it than that which came before. So with regard to the similarity between these two texts, two big things stuck out to me. One is the element-based co-lead being woken up by Katara after hundreds of years asleep as the last whatever, now, come on, Aang, we have to go from nation to nation, and in each nation you will acquire a skill until we face down the ding-dang-dong Fire Nation, what started this whole mess, and heal the world. But the thing that stuck out most in my mind as a trend that I've been seeing a lot in animation and YA literature, and it's not a bad thing, Jesus, it's what I'm going to call, for lack of originality, the Zuko. The princeling of the rival nation who has a lot to prove to their family and who serves as the principal antagonist for a while our heroes bop from nation to nation and he chases them around but eventually starts to have a change of heart and a redemption arc. Now, the reason I cited like half of YA fantasy, again, I did not mean literally half, that was hyperbole. Well, basically it was because that most of the YA fantasy that I had read, because those were, the big names that, I had to read to be hep to the jive, that were released in the last few years have Avatar as influences, the most high profile of which being Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. Now, I did enjoy this book, and like Raya, it also made heavy use of the Zuko, and for that reason, it was the first thing that popped into my head as being similar to Raya. And yes, Avatar: The Last Airbender makes heavy use of Asian and anime tropes, but it was the piece of media that popularized a lot of these things in the US. You didn't really see, like, redemption arcs over several seasons before that, and now you see it all the time. Steven Universe does it, the new She-Ra does it, Kipo kind of does it with the frog and the monkey. Okay, I never said the Zuko had to be sexy. And now we have Raya and the Last Dragon. Now, if you did read into my tweet that I was dismissing this or saying it was a bad thing, I guess I could understand that read because it wasn't very gracefully worded and it doesn't say anything positive. But it doesn't say anything negative either. It is an inherently neutral statement. It is an observation. It's not even a critique. And so I was like, this is not a dig, you crazies. And then the line is like, oh, you're calling POC crazy, which is so disingenuous when the vast majority of people losing their shit at me in my mentions were white people projecting their own insecurities at me. Like, obviously, ya crazies was a joke, but as a writer and a media critic, it was just so frustrating for me to see people interpreting the comparison of these two things as a dig. Like, I was insulting one by comparing it to the other. What is this, like, CinemaSins brain poisoning? Thing being similar to other thing not bad. One of the funnest things as a writer you get to do when discussing your book or your media is discussing the influences, because ostensibly they are something the author loves and is excited to talk about. So I also saw like a bunch of these like weird low digs like, oh, Axiom's End is so original. Oh, Axiom's End is derivative. Like, I know that! I have marketed the damn thing on it being inspired by alien invasion movies and TV shows of the 90s and 2000s. There's a reason why I made a bunch of content about those influences in the year leading up to its release. Do you want me to give you a list of them? Everything has influences, and Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the most successful and beloved children's shows of all time. Author Tomi Adeyemi said of Children of Blood and Bone, the book Raya reminded me a lot of, I have Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older, and to the right of it there's An Ember in the Ashes by Sabat Tahir, and above it is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Children of Blood and Bone is the baby of all three. And even one of the screenwriters of Raya has said that although Avatar was not a direct inspiration, we don't shy away from the comparison because it's a beautiful series. No matter how many mental backbends I do, even if you're tired of this take or feel like it's flattening everything inspired by the largest continent on Earth, I cannot begin to understand this causing hurt or anguish unless you are reading into it something that I did not say, especially when I'm like the 800th person to make this very milquetoast observation. Screen Junkies had released an honest trailer several days earlier making the exact same comparison for the exact same reasons.
Long ago, the five lands lived together in harmony. Then everything changed when the Drew Nation attacked. Ryatar, the last air dragon, Avatar, Raya and the last dragon.
And look at that dislike ratio. I don't think there is a single video on my entire channel with a dislike ratio that low. I wonder why they didn't get any backlash. I wonder why it could be. Part 6, She Deserved It. If Twitter had streets, there would have been dancing in them when I deleted my account. Like Justine Sacco getting fired, like everyone held accountable by an online mob before me, this was taken as a victory by many, many people. And so the problem with making a big thing out of this tweet, which at worst could be considered an unintentional microaggression, made the outraged reaction to it kind of hard to justify. Which is why we need to establish a history of my offenses to bolster their case. And this is where the list of sins comes in. I'm trending on Twitter for like 2 days. There's all this discourse, so of course people are going to have second thoughts, like, why are so many people talking about this? Maybe this has gotten out of hand. Maybe the backlash wasn't worth the original sin. And here comes Dragon Celeste and hundreds like her like, no, don't worry. This is accountability. Here is the long list of sins proving that this is just mask off. She has a long history. How has she not been called out before? I know someone who's met her and they say she's a bad person. So you don't need to feel bad about hounding her because she deserves it. And my god, just the joy people took in this, like seeing me taken down a peg. Good fucking riddance, bitch. Good riddance. Good fucking riddance. Terrible human being. Dislikes Asians too. Y'all getting Lindsay Ellis is beautiful. Don't know shit about her, I can just look at a white person and know they're awful. Can't stand that human being. Glad I won't have to see her tweets. Her takes were so awful and embarrassing. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near her. Fuck Lindsay Ellis and her awful racism, and for being a prominent Phantom fan when it should be me. But mostly the racism. I hate her and Jenny Nicholson. Serene smiley faces. Lindsay Ellis deleted. People like Lindsay Ellis are finally facing consequences for being atrocious human beings. Lindsay Ellis getting cancelled is good, actually. I will die on this fucking hill. What have I done to you? Are you Rent fans? So many times I've seen people show the damning evidence to others like, see? Look at this. Only have the people they're showing it to be like, I don't understand where you're getting this. Is there some context I'm missing? Here is a woman of color doing that very thing to Kat Black, demanding that she answer for sometimes collaborating with such a racist. And Kat basically responded, why the fuck are you demanding that I answer for my white colleagues? Leave her the fuck alone. And this is just the switches. Oh, the joy the diet Nazis took in this. God, they love it when the left eats their own, and why wouldn't they? It's hilarious when your political enemies tear each other apart. I mean, to reiterate, these people have been trying to take me down for years. Keep trying, boys. And part of that joy comes with this justification of what they perceive as someone with real power and wealth and privilege being taken down a peg. It's like this bizarre delusion that I or any of my friends have any real power or influence outside of our very niche corner of the internet. I am not a real celebrity. I almost never get recognized in public. I don't have a PR team or a manager or a stylist or a team of lawyers. Just one very anxious literary agent and one YouTube agent who, honestly, he thinks this shit is hilarious. I honestly kind of miss the diet Nazis because, like, they at least knew what they were. They weren't harassing me like it was some civil rights campaign that might make the world marginally more just. They were just bullies, plain and simple, and they were proud of it. And honestly, in hindsight, I kind of respect that. At least my mentions being full of like pictures of razor blades and dead animals and Clorox saying, hey, drink this, at least that's honest. I do appreciate that the people making good faith criticisms are not responsible for the people making bad faith criticisms or, for that matter, threats or rejoicing in my downfall. But it is beyond the scope of reasonable to expect me to take all this stimulus, thousands of people screaming at me, from reasonable to sadistic, especially considering everything I've been through in my life, and behave like the perfect victim. If you just say the right thing, we'll leave you alone. If you just behave in the way we're asking, we'll make it go away. If you just apologize, we just stop. All she had to do was listen. She had a long history of problematic shit and she never listened. She should have done the work to make amends. Maybe next time don't call an entire marginalized group crazy. She's a biphobic, transphobic, racist mess who deleted her account rather than apologize for being a piece of shit. She couldn't take actual criticism from people who knew more than she did. Motherfucker, all you had to do was apologize for her white bread take and move on. Deleted her own account, then just apologized. Nuked her account instead of apologized. Totally unraveled under the slightest scrutiny. Deleted her account instead of saying, I fucked up. Sorry. Why are you so emotional? Why are you so upset? I'm not with the hundreds of people saying you're responsible for hate crimes and mass murder. I'm not one of the people trotting out the obsessive documentation of every misstep you've ever made over the last 15 years. I'm the reasonable one. And I'm calm. Why aren't you calm? Why aren't you addressing this? Why hasn't she apologized? When is she going to apologize? When are you going to apologize? Never, Becky. The answer is never. At least, not to you. Someone on my subreddit wrote a really thoughtful essay on the whole situation, and here is a quote from that. Abuse should always be a part of our analysis, and we should be aware every single second that we participate in these conversations that our actions have the potential to excuse or perpetuate abuse. We should take responsibility for that, take steps to mitigate it, and hold ourselves accountable. This is why I have such distrust for the position, why should I have to talk about abuse? I'm not personally abusing anyone. You should have distrust for that position, because that is exactly what they said to me during Gamergate. The exact same thing. Part 7. You're next. What follows in campaigns like this is the other isolation tactic, targeting your colleagues, friends, and loved ones. This comes in two flavors, demanding that the colleagues of the accused answer for their crimes, or trying to deplatform said colleagues because you're already riding high off the previous victory, so who's next? Sarah Z is next. Jenny Nicholson is next. ContraPoints is next. Jenny in particular. Jenny is next. Jenny, you're next. Jenny next. Jenny next. Jenny next. Both Jenny Nicholson and ContraPoints were trending at certain points during the weekend because of me. Fake screenshots of a racist tweet that Jenny never made spread like wildfire with the goal of getting her driven off of Twitter because of me. And a year and a half ago, the shoe was on the other foot because a lot of the same crowd was attacking Natalie. It must needs be remarked that a huge contingent of the people who have it out for me right now hate me for sticking by Natalie during the Angel Buck incident about 18 months ago. And if you want to know more about that, here's the thing. And it's really only now that I can make sense of it that I got so many hate follows after that people were so eager to screen cap anything and everything I said on Twitter, no matter how minor or petty, to create this narrative of me as a secret horrible person just because I stood up for my friend. And I don't regret doing it. I would do it again, but it is insane that I am paying such a high price for that now. And now my other colleagues are being targeted for no other reason than the crime of being friends with me, for not publicly denouncing me, for not validating their anger. And why? Jenny is one of the smartest, most insightful people I know. Sarah always floors me with how much research and nuance and sensitivity she brings to her topics, and she's only 22. Natalie is, well, she's a whore, but she's my whore. These obsessive campaigns to try to push these narratives of my friends as bad people and secret TERFs and secret racists are just baffling to me. Global fascism is on the rise on a level we haven't seen in more than a generation. Are there not enough out and proud racists that you feel you need to unmask the My Little Pony YouTuber? Jenny next, Jenny next, Jenny next. So do not give me this horseshit about accountability. This is obviously just entertainment to you. Just fucking own it. Obsessively chronicling every perceived misstep we've ever made that could be interpreted badly, all while completely ignoring the rest of our entire bodies of work. Why are you wasting so much energy on this? Because you can't impact people who are actually doing your community harm. You can't shame the shameless. Trump will never face justice. Brett Kavanaugh's on the Supreme Court for life. Ben Shapiro gets off on your outrage. So you shame those who can be shamed. And if you call one of us bigoted enough times, people will start to believe it, and then you can feel like you solved racism by spreading lies about a person you have never met and never will, and was doing you and your community no harm. Well done. Shabash. Good job. Fuck every single one of you. You do not deserve grace. You do not deserve sympathy. Part 8. The Beast. So obviously in my case, the easy thing to do would be eat crow and move on. I never would have gotten trending if I hadn't deleted my Twitter account, but I'm not here to say a bunch of shit I don't mean because PR. Fuck PR. You want your precious authenticity? Here it is. There's a danger to normalizing the insincere apology, and if we normalize acting like PR bots and dole out disingenuous apologies whenever they are demanded for any reason, valid or invalid, any harm, real or imagined, then this isn't discourse. This is performance. The reason campaigns like this gain traction is because they prey on communities that try to operate in good faith. They take advantage of people's goodwill. And they condition cynicism. So inevitably, people harden over. They default to skepticism. Even this fucking woman of color who harangued Cat Black demanding that she answer for collaborating with such a racist. Well, guess what? That person eventually fessed up to being a white man before deleting his account because, you know, listen to POC. People are so obsessed with identity as a rhetorical trump card, you can't even take it on good faith that people are who they say they are anymore. And they take that desire to do right and exploit it because it makes them feel powerful. This is the real mask off. You're next, Jenny. You're next, Sarah. You're next, Natalie. Because running women off Twitter is fun. I mean, accountability. So militantly performing allyship by rooting out corruption like it's the fucking Red Scare, sharing doctored screenshots of tweets that don't exist and willfully misinterpreting things to prove that the My Little Pony YouTuber is a secret racist. Deep down, you know you're just doing it for clout. right? You should be sensitive to marginalized groups, and you should be constantly advocating for a more just world and against racism, because we all have the stink on us. But that should be the goal in itself, not performing on Twitter so people can reassure you you're one of the good ones, so you can get max retweets for an awesome dunk. I am not innocent. I have done this. And as content creators, our behavior online turns from due diligence into threat modeling. And I'm not playing this game anymore. Trying to stay 18 steps ahead of the worst possible interpretation of my words or actions isn't taking accountability. It's just self-defense. It's just protecting the brand. And I understand why there is this lingering culture of distrust, especially among communities of color, but it is the height of dishonesty to suggest that the kind of atmosphere where everything is taken in bad faith leads to a more just world. I'm not furious because I'm uniquely wronged. I will be fine. I didn't actually lose anything. I could have pretended nothing happened and probably be better off because nobody cares about the fucking riot tweet. I'm furious because this keeps happening and we have deluded ourselves into thinking that savaging each other for the smallest transgression and the most minor disagreement is helping right the wrongs of the world. That there's this broad refusal to admit that our systems that operate on good faith are very often abused. I was going to include a section about other people from more marginalized groups than me who are held to an even higher standard of purity, who have lost way more than I have for equally minor perceived transgressions, but you probably already know some, and they probably don't want me using their names anyway. But I feel like I need to impress that I didn't start getting noticeable harassment from the purity tester brigade until I stood up for a trans woman on Twitter over, and I cannot express this enough, a situation that did not deserve anything approaching the level of outrage that it fostered. And that backlash did not come from the alt-right or even the diet Nazis, but our own community, our side. This is why they win. A friend of mine named it the Beast, the name for this fear that we all live under but don't acknowledge. And over the last few years, I have had so many of my colleagues, all of them women, people of color, trans people, queer people, or some combination of the above, voice to me the constant anxiety that they live with about maybe saying something wrong that will get them on the bad side of their own communities. Every thought is a hostage situation. Is this the tweet that's going to sink me? So what do we call it? What is the name for this unspoken, unacknowledged culture of fear where we all know that one misstep can ruin our lives? This social media culture where we participate in the public shaming one day and become chained to the pillory the next. We can't even talk about it because the beast does not have a name. If we admit that this is a problem, then the right will just take it and run with it and use it to increase their own power. Same as they did with cancel. Same as they did with woke. Same as they did with fake news. If it has a name, then it has power. So it is a discussion that cannot be had. And so we do not have it. We say cancel culture doesn't exist and ignore this disease, pretend it isn't doing real harm, not just to individuals who are targeted, but to the state of discourse in general, and especially to individuals in marginalized groups, because they are always held to the highest standard of purity and they always have the most to lose. It isn't even about saying something tone-deaf or insensitive. A mere difference in opinion might get you fired from your job if enough people raise a stink about it. And just so we're clear, I'm not really even talking about me. I will be fine. But living under the shadow of the beast makes it hard to just create at all. A big factor in why it takes us so long to do a single video is threat modeling. Because God forbid you say something mildly positive about one of the bad ones that you did not know were bad. So much of the work we do is getting ahead of any potential misstep by adding like 1,800 caveats and acknowledgements, and it's never enough. Angelina and I were collaborating with fellow author and essayist Jeanette Ng on a video about the live-action Mulan that Jeanette was co-writing and was going to co-host, and we'd been working on it for months, and right after this happened, I was like, we have to scrap this video. But then after a few days, I was like, for what? Because a bunch of Twitter teens are gonna call me a racist for criticizing a movie nobody likes? Y'all were gonna do that either way. Believe me, I know that this video is not going to change any minds. It's going to make a lot of people very angry, and I hope they get lots of engagement. I hope they seethe. I wish you all of the retweets, but I can't stay ahead of it anymore. I'm not going to do the performance of avoiding offense, of staying 500 steps ahead of everything that might be misread or misinterpreted, not because it's the right thing to do, but just to protect my brand. Fuck my brand. I will do the due diligence, but I'm done with threat modeling. I just don't care anymore. If you want to read bigoted dog whistles into everything I say, go with God. If you want to pass my list of sins to everyone who so much as mentions me in a positive way, I hope it brings you peace. If you want to speculate on my private life, I hope it brings you much profit. I hope you accrue much social capital. I personally choose to take a page from the book of my political enemies. You can't shame the shameless, so I'm going to use the term cancel in its original vernacular meaning. I am canceling shame, and I will fuck with shame no more forever. So if anything, thank you for liberating me from giving a fuck. Part 9. What now? I want to acknowledge that I got dozens, if not hundreds, of messages of support in private through Patreon, Instagram, and email. And while not all of them were 100% you did nothing wrong, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that. Some of them genuinely made me cry with how kind they were. Even some of the ones who were critical of what I said were done with a sense of empathy. And I'm sorry I didn't respond to most of you, but just know I read all of your messages. And friendly reminder, I will be fine. Until my liver gives out. This is like the 800th time something like this has happened to me. But am I done with Twitter? Basically, yeah. I honestly intended to be forever done with Twitter, but I was then reminded that I am contractually obligated to promote my books through social, contractually obligated pre-order link for my second book in the description. So I'll still use it for that sort of thing, and I will continue using it to, promote smaller creators and authors when I find something that I think deserve attention. And also shameless nepotism. These people calling me a nepotist. How dare you say a thing that is true? But my biggest mistake was using Twitter in the way that a lot of my friends who had way fewer followers than me did. Like, yeah, I can be a little edgy, I can make jokey jokes, I can just be, I can be like one of the boys. And I should have stopped doing that a long time ago. Worse, Twitter is just a recipe for both addiction and misery. They call it doom scrolling for a reason. Like, even in the last couple of weeks, I feel like my brain is having to rewire just this impulse to constantly be checking Twitter. And it was making me a shittier person. I was getting in fights with people more and more. I was dunking on people more and more. I was clapping back at followers more and more. Like, one other person I owe an apology to is Movie Bob. I told him on Twitter to leave me alone because he was acting like a creep by being overfamiliar and continually signaling to the world that we're friends. And he was acting like a creep, and we're not friends. But I would have never done that if I had known that the diet Nazis were going to turn that into a meme. Like, I don't like a lot of what he says on Twitter either, but please stop using my face to torture this man. Leave him alone. So at its core, this was a wake-up call. And that is why I deleted my account. Part end. It can happen to you. I want to reaffirm that the roots of this do stem from a rise in anti-Asian racism, and that racism is very real. As I was writing this video, a friend of mine on Facebook posted a screen cap of this truly heinous thing that Mike Huckabee said, which not only regurgitates this inane conservative garbage about identity politics, it completely dismisses the very real wave of hate that is happening in America right now. And he posted it with this comment: "White people, please pay attention. Every day, a person of color has to look at something like this, or worse, every literal day. Just try to imagine what that would do to your psyche." And it hurt to read, and honestly, it hurts for me to even read out loud right now because it's true. I literally only can imagine. Few of the people stoking anti-Asian violence right now will suffer consequences, and probably more racist attacks will occur, and this is just another chapter in our country's long, sad history of anti-Asian racism. And the reality is there's not a lot we as individuals can do about that. We live in a fundamentally unjust world. I do acknowledge that. And at the beginning anyway, a lot of the frustration at the original tweet did stem from that. And I don't want to dismiss all public feedback as inevitably harassment. I think it's important to retain this nuance, lest we always frame the issue of harassment as a blanket condemnation of the public and public feedback. But I also cannot stress enough how quickly this whole situation went from valid criticism rooted in real hurt to straight up abuse, and not just of me, of my friends, my colleagues, this disease that is Twitter enacting the same passion play again and again and again. Even people who were sympathetic to me, they still wanted to attribute the hate to one thing, one slip of the tongue, one bad take, one wrong affiliation, one wrong tone I took. I've seen so many people try to rationalize it, even when they think I did nothing wrong. But the reality is, what gets you on the radar of the mob is nothing. A picture, a joke, a comment, just existing as a woman, a person of color, a woman of color, a queer person, doing your job, one unpopular opinion, a poorly aged take, being online for too long, being associated with the wrong person, saying something nice about the wrong person. Sometimes all it takes is being successful. People want to rationalize your mistakes and list them and label them, not because it has anything ultimately to do with you. It doesn't. But because they want to reassure themselves that it will never happen to them, that it will never be them on the pillory. So even if you don't think I did anything wrong, if you can still pin this on a specific error, then you can distance yourself and sleep well that you would know better than to make the same mistake. And it would never happen to you. And that's just not how it works. Part of what makes Twitter so toxic is the sense of hopelessness it engenders. You're exposed to this never-ending stream of bad news and constant examples of how fucked the world is, and reminders that you have the power to effect very little change. That, compounded with the fact that platforms like Twitter rely mostly on shorthand and are constantly encouraging you to produce and encourage knee-jerk reactions with very little context, means that hopelessness and powerlessness and aggression, it's gotta go somewhere. And on March 26, 2021, it got funneled to me. And I cannot in good faith say I have not done the same, mindlessly joined in on a dogpile on someone who said something stupid or insensitive because it felt good. And for a brief moment, it gave me a sense of power. But then that moment is gone, and the world is still shitty, and that person's life, whatever their infraction was, deserved or undeserved, is marginally worse for my involvement in it. And that is why I'm stepping away. So for all of the people who used me as their outlet for their pain and aggression on that crisp spring morn, I understand that you feel hopeless and powerless in an increasingly shitty world. And I understand that there is a reason to assume bad faith when so many other people have let you down. And the only thing I can do for you is extend the same grace and compassion that you extended to me.